Okay, let's get started. We have a good number of people in our webinar room, and we'll get going here. Welcome to the 2020 MASERC Showcase. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful fall day. I'm Meg Dewar. I'm part of the MASERC staff. I am the Research Outreach Specialist. I am so pleased to introduce our first presenter, Amy Kinsley. Dr. Kinsley is an assistant professor in the Department of Veterinary Population Medicine, whose research focuses on using advanced epidemiological modeling techniques to develop tools that support decision-making surrounding the management of invasive species, infectious diseases, and aquatic pollutants. Dr. Kinsley joined the MASERC Research Fellows in 2019 to lead a project for the state legislature to design a statewide AIS surveillance and early detection program for Minnesota. Amy has a BS in civil engineering from the University of Florida and a doctorate of veterinary medicine and a PhD from the University of Minnesota. Real quick before I turn it over to Amy, I just wanted to share a few notes on audience participation during this webinar. As you may have noticed, your microphone and camera are disabled during a Zoom webinar, but we do wholeheartedly welcome your participation in the chat or ask a question features. I'm going to be monitoring the chat and those boxes throughout Amy's entire talk. And then at the end, I will be passing those questions on to Amy. Our plan is to have about 25 minutes for audience Q&A. So please share your thoughts during or after the talk. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy.
Great, thank you, Meg. Can you hear me?
Yep, sounds great.
Great. So thank you for the introduction. And I want to thank you all for joining us today for the statewide surveillance and early detection program for Minnesota presentation. As Meg said, I'm Amy Kinsley, and I'm an assistant professor of aquatic epidemiology in the College of Vet Med. And I'm relatively new to the world of AIS. And one of the things that really excites me about this area of research is the high level of stakeholder engagement. And so again, thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to share with you an overview of this project. And so as Meg mentioned, in the last legislative session, MASERC was requested to develop recommendations for AIS surveillance and early detection in Minnesota. With that, they wanted us to address funding and policy implications. And so specifically, the points they wanted us to address were the following. So the first, they wanted us to cover what the most effective structure for a statewide aquatics early detection system would look like. They wanted to address whether we should employ eco-epidemiological models, optimized decision models, or related tools as mechanisms for determining how to best deploy limited resources. They wanted us to then touch upon how a statewide system should be funded and at what levels, and then also to address the regulatory, policy, and statutory changes that would need to be fully implemented for the statewide system. But before we dive into our findings, I think we should back up a little bit and consider why surveillance and early detection is important. And so we know that AIS are threatening our freshwater ecosystems. We know that that's leading to losses in biodiversity and changes in ecosystems that have substantial economic impacts. And surveillance can be used to inform prevention and management and help mitigate significant ecological and economic harm. And they can help us do so with greater efficiency and efficacy. Before we move forward, let's take the time and let's define surveillance and early detection and what we mean when we're working on addressing these points that were assigned to us from the legislature. So for surveillance, we mean the ongoing and systematic collection, analysis, and interpretation of AIS-related data. And that data is essential to planning, implementation, and evaluation of practices related to AIS. And so these are things that are already ongoing in the state and or things that are on the horizon that we expect to see coming with these challenges in the future. And then when we mention early detection, we're explicitly talking about the component of surveillance that's used to support the rapid response so that we can minimize the impacts of AIS and maximize the likelihood of containment and control. And in some cases, for some species, potentially eradication. And so the invasion process can be seen as a series of stages, and that involves colonization and establishment and spread, and a species must pass through these to cause the widespread ecological or economic harm. And the invasion curve shows that eradication of an invasive species is, well, we're not focused on necessarily eradication, but management of an invasive species becomes more difficult as time goes on, and that there's this lag period in which surveillance and early detection can really maximize our efforts. In addition to this, in addition to the detections, surveillance can be used also to document the distribution and abundance of an invasive species. They can be used to assess or generate new hypotheses about pathways of spread. They can help us evaluate ongoing management strategies, including prevention activities, and assess the safety of those. Surveillance is also helpful to assess new research needs and to facilitate planning around management. So to address the 4 points, I worked together with a project team, and that team consisted of experts. And those experts have experience in a variety of different backgrounds or in areas. In addition, we also worked with partners, with key stakeholders such as county managers, lake associations, businesses, and advocacy groups. The project team included Nick Phelps and from the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center, Robert Haight from the USDA Forest Service, Gretchen Hansen and Daniel Lurkin from the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center and the College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resources, and also Jerry Zhao and Camila Fonseca Sarmiento from Humphrey School of Public Affairs. And so each of these experts helped weigh in on different components so that we could provide a comprehensive list of recommendations. So I mentioned that we engaged stakeholders as well, and those stakeholders were engaged through a couple of different processes. One was through one-on-one interviews, and those interviews were conducted in February and March. And those interviews lasted about 60 minutes on average. 16 different counties and met with their AIS managers or coordinators. In addition, we met with Lake Association affiliates, local and state government employees, and local business owners. And we asked them questions about their existing programs and structure. We wanted to know how they were monitoring AIS currently, if they were using any sort of protocols, what protocols they were using, and where they were deriving that information from. We asked them about what focal species they were interested in, how they managed their data, and if they were sharing any of that data, and if so, how. We asked them about the decisions that they were making and how they were prioritizing those processes, and any additional comments that they wanted to include that they felt would be helpful for us in writing our report. We also reviewed government documents and scientific literature as well. And we met with stakeholders in a less formal setting than those one-on-one interviews, where we shared with them our preliminary results and some of the ideas that we had, and we gained feedback during that process as well. And so when we were looking at the effective program structure, we decided that there were really 4 key components. And those key components were surveys and inspections, partnerships and communication, education, research, and training, and then an evaluation component. And so for surveys and inspections, we were thinking about things like ways we could identify priority species, habitats, and pathways. We wanted these surveys and inspections to identify these priority pathways and locations where we could really maximize our efforts. So if we're monitoring one species, potentially we would be able to find others because we have strategized a way in which we would maximize those efforts. And to provide direction on surveillance activities. So we had more of a cohesive approach where information could be shared and valuable across many different scales. In terms of partnerships and communication, we were looking at mechanisms that fostered strong partnership and communication across agencies, legislators, stakeholders, and the public. and communication to foster the awareness and strategically engage others in identifying and reporting. And we know that there's a lot of activities that are currently ongoing with that right now. And we were looking to synthesize that information and provide any new opportunities to continue that work and also enhance those efforts. Same thing on the education front. We wanted to increase and maintain the public awareness that's currently ongoing and continue to contribute to that work. We wanted to touch upon fact sheets and videos, ID databases, and those types of things. We wanted to touch upon new technology and the ongoing research initiatives that are working to detect low abundance AIS. And identify the characteristics of threatening AIS. So trying to find out which habitats and invasiveness of different AIS and what those potential, and keeping those on the horizon for any new threats. And then we felt that an effective program structure wouldn't be complete without an evaluation process that assess the judicious use of resources. And also that took into account the efficiency and developed ways to be able to really measure that efficiency, which is not an easy feat. We also felt that that efficiency would include things that would eliminate duplicity and also allow for sustainable funding. And so all of these components kind of weave together and are all should be driven by a well-defined purpose. And that purpose would be used to communicate objectives that then drive those different surveillance activities. So then for the second point, we wanted to address the models and how we use these eco-epidemiological models or resource models to allocate resources when they're limited. And we know that numerous models have been developed to generate knowledge about AIS and how it's been used for surveillance. And these models range from statistical models that look for relationships between two or more variables that are based on empirical data that's been collected in the field, all the way to the other end of the spectrum of these mechanistic models that work to capture dynamics and really causal relationships of different components of complex systems, which we know that the issues associated with AIS are quite complex. And so those can be quite useful. And then all along that spectrum, there's other types of models that have been developed specifically for AIS that can be broadly categorized into kind of different buckets. Some of them don't fit perfectly, but these are the ones that within our literature review we've developed. Those are ecological niche models or risk analyses or resource allocation models. And so the important thing about modeling, though, isn't necessarily what the specific point is. It's more of a holistic perspective of developing a model with close feedback from modelers and stakeholders. And then not only identifying that specific research question, it's designing, calibrating the model, using empirical data if possible, performing sensitivity analyses, and refining the models as they become more available. And then eventually the goal of the models should be, in an ideal situation, not always, to eventually address an issue of policy or management. And so there's a variety of tools that have been developed to address AIS in Minnesota. And in the report, we wanted to focus on two that have been applied to Minnesota that have outputs that really address that question about deploying resources. And so two that I want to touch upon today, some of you have probably heard of if you've been part of the showcase in the past. The first is the risk model for surveillance. This model has been developed to forecast the potential risk associated with the spread of zebra mussels and starry stonewort. It's been applied to the entire state of Minnesota, and it considers the likelihood of introduction and establishment. And then the second model is the prioritization for watercraft inspection model. And that work was presented last year at the showcase. And it determines the optimal locations for watercraft inspections. And so that model's been done at the county level, but it has been done for the entire state of Minnesota and currently addresses zebra mussels, starry stonewort, Eurasian water milfoil, and spiny water flea. And so we worked to bring these two models to stakeholders through a user interface that we're really excited to present to you. And so we've developed a video to share with you guys to introduce you to the concepts of the model and the purpose, and to help engage you. And so while we're currently running through some quality control right now, and we're reaching the end of the development of that user interface, we hope that you're interested, and we hope that you guys are on the MACER listserv, because we will send out an email when it's available. But right now I'm going to share that video with you. So 1 second, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to go to here. Switch the screen. Be patient. Okay.
Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes, over 800,000 boats, and one big problem: aquatic invasive species. With hundreds of lakes infested with an AIS, we need data-driven management tools that can help inform complex decisions and slow the spread. However, given that management and prevention resources are limited, difficult decisions must be made. The question is often asked: where and how do we allocate our limited resources to be most effective?
The Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center has brought together ecologists, veterinary and public health epidemiologists, and managers to identify the highest risk lakes in the state. Over the last 5 years, we've worked to build massive lake connectivity networks for rivers and boat movements, and run thousands of simulations to verify the accuracy of the model predictions. Unfortunately, these models are being tested in real time as new lakes continue to become invaded. But we have seen these models are working really well and could be a useful tool to guide surveillance activities in the future. We put these models into a publicly available online dashboard called the AIS Explorer. Users can currently see the introduction risk of zebra mussels and starry stonewort for all lakes across Minnesota. Users can explore county by county and view detailed information of each lake. Users can also export the information, which can be useful for prioritizing surveillance activities.
By using the watercraft inspection data that helped form the base of the risk model, we were then able to develop a model to prioritize the location of watercraft inspection stations. And since we can't place watercraft inspectors at all of the public water access points, because we just don't have the resources to do that, we wanted to provide resource managers with an understanding of where to place inspectors so that they can maximize the impact of this AIS prevention activity. One of the great features of AIS Explorer is that it allows end users to filter by county. And for the optimization for watercraft inspection locations, the end user can see a list of the recommended inspection sites. The list ranks the lakes based on their infestation status and boater movements, giving priority to lakes that either send or receive the highest number of boats moving from infested to uninfested water bodies. These ranked inspection lists can be generated for zebra mussels, starry stonewort, Eurasian water milfoil, spiny water flea, and any combination thereof.
The AIS Explorer is a free tool that can be accessed by managers and the public at aisexplorer.org.
Great. So I noticed, Meg, that you had offered to unmute me. I'm hoping everyone was able to see and hear the beginning of the video.
Yes.
Okay.
I would say 90% of it came
Okay.
through.
Okay. Great. Great. I didn't realize it automatically muted me, so I'll check on that. Great. So as I mentioned, we're in the quality control, really last final stretch of ironing out the details on that user interface. And so we're really excited to share it with you guys. And we will let you know when it goes live. So make sure you're on the listserv or have a way to connect with us. And you can also come up at the end of the talk and make sure that you guys come up. Sorry, I'm thinking we're still live, obviously not. In the chat box, make sure that we have your information and can get that to you. So for the fourth point, we were asked to address funding. And currently, we know that the AIS prevention aid has dispersed to counties. And that is to prevent or limit the spread of AIS at water access points and within the county. And currently that appropriation is for $10 million a year, and that's distributed amongst the counties based on the watercraft trailer launches and parking spaces. And some of the benefits of that is that it's fostered innovation, it's created opportunities at the local level, it has the potential to harness local resources. It brings the government closer to the citizens that play a large role in AIS prevention and surveillance to date, and creates greater opportunities for collaboration. And while all those things are wonderful, it also comes with some cons. And so some of the cons that came up in our meeting with stakeholders and also through our analysis of the current framework is that it only right now considers public access points, which we know is not totally encompassing of all of the risk. Some counties don't receive adequate support, and so that can create additional burdens on them when they want to undertake projects that then go above the cost in which they currently receive, and doesn't allow for really more long-term strategic planning. We know that the current model doesn't take into account other key risk factors. And so one of those, for example, would be proximity to other infested water bodies. And so we felt that if we were going in to provide recommendations on how we could create a statewide surveillance program, potentially we could address some of the cons while also strengthening them and add more opportunities for focus on surveillance and early detection. So one of the recommendations we have developed is to adjust the funding distribution formula. And that would be to include a baseline of $15,000 per county to allow for hiring a part-time individual dedicated to AIS activities. We also felt that by adjusting the distribution, we could make room for specific allocation of the funds specifically towards prevention and surveillance activities. And so we could chunk up that money and guide that towards activities that the counties are doing and get them going on some incentives for that. We also felt that for some of those counties that felt like they were burdened, potentially they would want to opt out and have that money go into a fund for grants. And those grants could be used to develop other types of projects, potentially those geared towards collaboration. We also felt like their increase in the current funding could be useful in developing further activities on surveillance and early detection, and that those funds could be used specifically towards collaboration projects and towards increasing those activities. So sources that we felt like were potential options were to increase the non-resident fishing license. And we did a comparison with states locally or neighboring states and states out west, and saw that there was an opportunity to potentially increase and get some funds from that area. Like I said, the opt-out money could potentially be used in different ways to help promote activities. We potentially could increase the watercraft registration. There may not be something that would be opted for, but just wanted to throw it out there as an option. And then another thing that came up was a decontamination fee. And so that was inspired by like a $50 charge that Montana puts on decontamination. And so each of these have some pluses and minuses for whether we would want to choose that route or not, but nonetheless, options that we developed and included in the report. And then on to the fourth point, they asked us to address the regulatory, statutory, and policy changes. And one of the things that came up was really this need for a statewide AIS surveillance and early detection plan that would be quite mobile and separate from the state invasive species management plan to date, that could be nimble and fluid and adjust to the needs, but still provide guidance that's needed for specific surveillance and early detection that could provide more of a holistic approach where all of the local level activities that are addressed to meet the local needs are being achieved while also working towards a common goal for the state. We also felt that a statewide web accessible database for AIS efforts could centralize information, and that could include information regarding the current surveillance and early detection efforts, any of those that arise through the new funding initiatives, moving towards the horizon, in any new research or technology that comes about. It could be a fluid document that continues to collect that information and may be able to provide users with access to more detailed information. So not only whether there was a detection, but also about the frequency and the intensity of the efforts and what locations using what strategic approach for what AIS. And so having that information accessible could be helpful. We also felt that collaboration and communication are really critical to having a statewide program, and that we want to continue to support the existing opportunities and to enhance those so that there's different agencies can continue to connect, communicate, and collaborate, that those things would be long-term and meaningful and could continue to grow. So with that, I want to thank all of the individuals who helped provide feedback for these recommendations that we had provided. I want to thank the county manager specifically and the affiliates from the lake associations and the DNR. I want to thank our project team members and Epi Interactive, who's the company who helped us develop the dashboard. I want to thank MASERC for their support and for providing this opportunity for me to share these results with you guys today. And the collaborators on the various modeling projects, very quickly, Robert Haight, Zoe Cow, Ava Enns. I want to thank those that provided feedback to us on the models, which includes but is not limited to Jacob Fry, Cole Lowenson, Justin Townsend, and Ariana Richardson. Thank you guys for all of your feedback. I know that was a quick run through of a lot of information, but that's kind of the nature of trying to condense it into a short time point. So luckily, we have a lot of time for questions, so I'd like to open that up to you guys now.
All right, thank you, Amy. That was really great. We actually don't have any questions yet. There was one, maybe you can fact check me. Can you give some more details on the timeline on when the website for the AIS Explorer will be live and available to the public?
Yeah, so we're thinking hopefully within the next month, we'll be able to get it out, definitely this fall. We've been, again, ironing out kind of some minor issues and just making sure that it functions as well as it can when we release it. So we want to make sure that it's valuable and readily available. We also will have an option in there for feedback. If you guys see any opportunities for development in the future, if you're experiencing any issues. And so we're really excited to get that information out to you.
Okay. And Amy, if there are people, county staff or lake associations that want to be involved kind of on the ground level in the training stage, how would they get involved with this as early as possible?
Yeah, sure. So in the past, Robert Haight and I have had people come and connect with us if they were specifically interested in looking at the decision optimization component, and if they wanted to work on developing some more tailored approaches to some of their analyses. We've had them reach out and they can do that through our email addresses. So I don't know if they have access to my contact information through any of the MASERC, information that's been released, but I can also put my email address in the chat box if anybody is interested in connecting.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. Okay, now we've got some questions coming in. Question from our Haight, or Bob Haight. Can you give some examples of statewide goals for AIS prevention?
Sure. So we explicitly are we talking about goals in general?
Doesn't specify. Bob, do you want to chime in there in the chat and elaborate a little bit? Goals in general.
Yeah, so I think that, and we're talking about how we develop objectives or goals that then tie to different activities that we would conduct for surveillance. And so I think currently we can have kind of larger objectives, such as we want to limit the introduction or the spread of AIS through the state. and we could target specific AIS that we're interested in. And then from there, we could develop the priorities for which AIS we would focus on. And then from there, we could say, okay, let's say we want to, if it's an AIS that we want to mitigate the spread of that's already been introduced into the state, one of those management goals could be, for instance, to intercept X number of watercrafts that are moving from infested to uninfested water bodies. And I use that example of that's more tied to the research that I'm doing, but it's something that I feel comfortable providing a little bit more of a specific example to. If we have the data, if we've done the surveillance, and part of the watercraft inspection program helps us do that, is to gather that information and to be able to set that goal where we can not only set an explicit goal, we want to maybe intercept, let's say, 80% of the boats that are moving from those infested to uninfested water bodies. Then we can go ahead and develop the activities that do that. So we can place watercraft inspectors in the locations that would be most effective. And then we can measure whether we're intercepting those boats or not. And we can use some of the models that we've developed to be able to measure that. And so that's one thing that comes off the top of my head. But I think those goals can go from that larger all the way down to a more refined that's tied to that action. And those things can be laid out at a variety of different spatial scales as well. So at the state level, we can also do that at the county level. We continue to go more local as well.
Great. Okay. Next question comes from Tina Fitzgerald with the DNR. It's a good question. She's asking for these potential adjustments to the funding, how would that account for all the other responsibilities that a lot of county AIS managers also have besides just AIS surveillance? How would that account for control and management of invasive species, enforcement, and outreach?
Yeah, and I think that's a point that comes up a lot, is if we're adding and asking to prioritize surveillance and early detection, what does that mean for the current activities? And really the way I see surveillance and early detection incorporating is really thinking about how we can collect and measure data that can be used to enhance the efficacy of the work that we're currently doing. So I see it as complementary to the work that we're doing. And hopefully if we were to get an increase in the funds and a restructuring of the distribution, that would help make space for some of that work. But again, I don't see it as, I know there's limited resources, but I don't see it necessarily as a competition between the two, as much as if we have more data from surveillance, we can make better decisions about those management activities and be able to adjust so that we're increasing the impact of that. And so I think that that is something that might not come off in the first year. I think it's something that's going to have to be worked towards, because the surveillance information is iterative. The information that we get out will go into the new activities, and that will all feed back. But yeah, that's really how I see it. And I hear that. I hear that it feels like a competition. And again, I think that's one of the main reasons that we asked, well, we need some sort of baseline funding, and an increase in that funding would also be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Quick question from Jeff Lovegren at Lake Vermilion. What's the timeline of submitting this report to the legislature?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're currently, we have all of the pieces of the report together that we're interested in, and we're still trying to tie it together so that it's presented as a cohesive program. And so we're working on refining some of the minor details in order to do that. And so I'm hoping that we will submit it within the next month. The timing gets a little bit off with COVID at times and having a large group of people interacting, but really that goal is to get it out there in about a month.
Great. And Amy, we have a couple questions about how we chose which counties to include, and if there was a certain area. Do you want me to try to answer that one?
Yeah, I know you were a big part of that, so that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So as far as the counties, it was relatively ad hoc. We were mostly looking at the state aid distribution. We really, for sure, wanted to speak to the counties that were in the Big Ten, as they're called, and then from there, we tried to spread out the area of influence. Of course, in the southern and southwestern part of Minnesota and northwestern, there just are not that many lakes. They don't have that many ramps and parking spaces. And so in the current funding calculation of state aid, they're just not receiving that much because the need is not really there. So, so just by the default of geography and the funding system, most of our the folks we contacted were kind of in that central and northern lakes part of Minnesota. I also spoke with Phil Hunsinger and Tina Fitzgerald, who are the Minnesota DNR planners that work with the counties to administer their state aid strategically. I just got recommendations from them. And that was just sort of based on who returned my phone calls and emails and who had an hour or two to talk with us, and kind of took some personal recommendations from those folks. So it was not systematic, but we did start out with that list of the state aid and kind of went from there. Hope that answers the question. We have a question from Phil. With proposed $15,000 baseline funding for counties, how would you determine who gets more on top of that for their prevention and surveillance efforts?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And really that funding distribution equation we're still working on, and that's still something that we want to iron the details out on. The plan right now, though, is that we're trying to balance out who's going to get the funds without penalizing anybody who doesn't already have the resources needed to invest in prevention and surveillance efforts. So we're trying to be very thoughtful about that, and we have some ideas that we're kicking around, but we're really not ready to present the details on yet. But yes, I hear that. Really that $15,000 baseline funding was geared towards those counties that were receiving on the lower end of the distribution of fundings, so that they were able to at least have one person that was dedicated towards AIS activities, and that they didn't feel like they were wearing too many hats to be able to truly dedicate some significant time to the issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question here from Liz Anderson. Amy, you had mentioned this potential like statewide database to track AIS management activities. And the question is, how might this be different than databases that are already in place like EdMaps? And Liz, maybe Liz might be referencing, so there's EdMaps for people that aren't aware. This is a nationwide, region-wide citizen science and professional weed or invasive species mapping platform on the internet, and EdMaps does also have some applications for tracking treatments. So this could be what is referred to.
Yeah, so we were thinking this statewide database of activities could be geared towards things that are not only specific to Minnesota, but we're able to provide more details than what's able to be captured and documented in EdMaps to date. So we were thinking that people could go in, and not only are they identifying where and when they've had a detection, but they can include all of their different efforts, what different protocols they were using, any sort of information that they would want to share. And so we wanted it to be fluid so that it could move towards the needs of the state. And so if the state had a different need than maybe what was happening at the national level, it would be more readily available to adapt to those different needs and the ability to hold larger amounts of information. And so you can imagine that if someone's going out and doing surveillance and they're not detecting anything, that potentially that's not being reported to EdMaps. And so in this case, we would want to make sure that people are including that information, because negative findings can also be used to gain information about really is that water body undetected, and how much certainty do we have in that, I don't want to call it necessarily uninfested, but lack of identification in that lake. So thinking about really just making it a more comprehensive and fluid than EdMaps.
Great. And Amy, so question from someone on a lake association, from Jane, wondering how lake associations can get involved and provide feedback, especially it sounds like the launch at their lake is not part of the county inspection, so it might not have the boater activity data.
Yeah, so as we point out, that's definitely one of the cons of the existing structure is that it doesn't account for any of the private accesses. But if anybody's interested in providing feedback, I would be happy to accept that. They can also reach out to anyone on the project team as well and provide that information. I was going to insert my email address in the chat box, but I didn't see that as an option. And so I'll have to connect with Meg, but make sure I can get that out to you guys. So you can reach out to me. I would be happy to chat with anybody further who has any sort of ideas or information or wants to ask any other follow-up questions that might come to them after today, and help also provide more information on some of the thought processes that we went through to get to this point right now.
Amy, I'll share your email into the chat in just
Okay, great. That's a good.
We have a question from Meg McCochran, one of our other MASIC researchers. Meg is wondering about these models, and it seems like they're good for assessing risk of spread within the state. How and is it, and how is it assessing risk from out of state boats?
Yeah, so that's a great point. And I think that's something that comes up a lot in conversations when we share this material, but currently they're not accounting for the risk of spread from out of state. Currently they're looking at the spread for the risk model. It's looking at just within the state, accounting for those water bodies that are currently infested. The great thing about that model is that if there were a new infestation identified in a water body, it's going to automatically update and change those risk scores. And so we can't account for that risk right now in the way that the model's set out. It does have an element of fluidity. So we are looking forward into the future of expanding some of these efforts. And I think one of the areas, again, that has come up is this idea of out of boat movements. The great limitation there is the data. So if we have data on these out of state boat movements, it could be a lot easier for us to be able to develop those things. But currently we don't have that access to that data. We don't have that data. And so then for the watercraft inspection data, that is functioning at the county level. And then we've done it for every county within the state. So again, that one also doesn't count for any of those movements. But again, in the future, if we were to come up with data from neighboring states or any other access to information on that, it could be something that could be included in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how and if large rivers that have public accesses are included in the current system of boat inspections, and whether or not that was included in the model?
That's a great point. So right now we're including all of the water bodies that have DOWs assigned to them. And from what I understand, it's primarily focused on the lakes. And so I think, I might have to check on that. Let me double check on that, because I don't want to overspeak to that. Is that specifically for the inspection model, or are you asking about the risk model as well?
The question comes from Jeff Korpick, and verbatim is, are large rivers included in the boat inspection? So,
the boat inspection model.
Yeah.
So I think it includes all of the water bodies that have DOWs designated. Okay. But I'll have to double check. I'll have to double check on those and get back to him.
Continuing on the topic of boat inspections and launching in public access, Eric Evenson wants to know how this model and our funding recommendations would account for a place like Lake Minnetonka that Eric is saying that has over 66,000 launches every year from public accesses, and then we have thousands more from the private launches.
Right, so the current framework only accounts for the public launches. Those private access points aren't accounted for. And so again, that's something that we considered as a con in the current structure, and is something that we think we could circumvent potentially in some ways by accounting for other factors associated with risk, but are still trying to work out those details.
Mm-hmm. Amy, real quick, can you clarify to our audience what a DOW number is?
Oh, the Division of Waters number. I'm sorry. Yes, I was using just some nomenclature. And so that's an individually assigned number that goes to the water bodies that that have been assigned that we can then account for. And because a lot of the water bodies will have similar names, and so we don't want to call them by the names. Sometimes there's similar water body names within the same county. So the DOW allows us to account for the individualized water bodies and then reflect that into our spatial data and provide the maps that you guys saw on the apps.
Okay. We have an interesting question from Tom Watson coming in here. And he's mentioning how in a lot of these kind of vacation counties that have a lot of vacation or seasonal cabins, such as Hubbard, Cass, and Crow Wing County, he says that about 50% or so of cabin owners pay property tax as seasonal recreation properties. He said that revenue goes to the state and not the county. And he's wondering if that factored into the funding proposals or the research in any way.
Yeah, so that's a great point, and that isn't something that we've explicitly addressed, but I think that that's definitely an interesting point. I don't know what percentage of the total funds are coming from that, but I think that's something worth looking into for sure.
Okay. Hopefully everybody's seeing that I have pasted Amy's email address into the chat a few times here. I also just wanted to say that we had I think like 115 participants earlier, so you might feel like you're all alone out there learning about AIS surveillance, but there are dozens and dozens of other folks on this call, and hopefully next year or a year or two from now, we'll all be together again. A quick question about boat inspector survey. He's asking, they're collecting data on the last body of water the boat was on, correct? And that is feeding into the model?
Yeah, so that's based on the Watercraft and Inspection Program survey where they're asking voters, yes.
Okay. Kathy Wagner brings up the issue of enforcement and problems with the penalties versus the penalties to deter AIS versus the cost, extremely high cost and impact of a new introduction, and the feeling that I share that it's a little bit disproportional. So how might that figure, has that figured into the recommendations that the plan that you're going to be submitting to the legislature?
Yeah, so that's a great point, and that's actually something that's come up with other stakeholders as well. And it's something that we have as a recommendation that's on the table, but that we're really heavily weighing because we don't want to go towards incorporating penalties or anything of that area. We really want to keep the focus on surveillance and early detection. And so we felt like that lied a little bit out of the scope, while helpful and quite useful in a lot of ways. Felt like it wasn't necessarily lying directly in the scope. And so maybe there's something there that she's trying to communicate that I'm missing. But yeah, it was something, again, that has come up from a lot of the stakeholders, and it's something that we've discussed and that we've considered, and right now we're leaning towards not including, but isn't completely off the table. So
okay, I think we have time for one more question, and this is sort of along the themes of compliance here. Comes from Kevin, and so he's pointing out, I think correctly, that the model, which is based on that inspector survey data, sort of we're assuming good intentions on the survey answers, that the person responding is being honest about what lake they were from and how long ago that was. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. And I think that's a point that comes up when people understand that we're using the watercraft inspection data to parameterize these models. I would say that we have large amounts of data that we've gone through and done robust statistical analyses on, and that information is the best information that we have to date. I would say that even if we have completely imperfect data, well, not completely imperfect, but in some cases imperfect data, it can still help us understand more about the system and help us update that system to get closer and closer to true values, which we may or may not ever know, right? And so we're using the data that we have the best we can, and are always looking for opportunities to improve our methods.
Okay. All right, we have to end there. There's a whole more afternoon of talks, and we have the poster session coming up at the end of the day. So thank you all for coming, and hope to see you again on some other showcase talks. All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, thank you.